Hey guys, my name is Albert Ellison III. I'm a screenwriter, producer, and award-winning director. I'm currently in production and on set of my first feature film, The Profession. In the description below the video, you can find a link to my free screenplay guide, which is an outline of the first 10 lessons in this course and every fundamental element to screenwriting. These are worksheets you can fill out as we discuss the topics, so you might be able to retain the information better. It's my gift to you, so submit your email and you'll find the package in your inbox. Get your hands on the worksheet before we proceed into this episode. In our last episode, we discussed the purpose of conflict. I showed you how conflict is the key to the exploration of your philosophical conflict, thus your story as a whole. But how do we create philosophical conflict? Conflict is meant to throw your characters into a series of scenes which will test and change them over time until they come to a point of resolution within the theme of the philosophical conflict. I think one of the best ways to explain how conflict needs to be constructed is to take a look at how video games work. When you're this scrawny little runt in the very beginning of the game, you wouldn't be able to leave a dent in the final boss if you were pitted against him. You have to level up, get the key items and abilities to be able to rise up to a level of power over time where you can face the final boss. Link has to push through dungeon after dungeon, in each one facing a particular challenge which tests everything he currently has and then gives him a new tool for the challenges which lie ahead. Similar to video games, our protagonist cannot face the levels of antagonism he comes to face at the end of the story lest there would be no progression. This would probably make your story suffer from a sense of unbelievability. No one would buy what's happening. Robert McKee calls this progressive complications. I like to call it escalation. The bread and butter of conflict is to create greater and greater conflict in a succession of events that continually pass points of no return. A point of no return could be internal, external, or philosophical. A personal moral boundary is crossed. Something happens to a person you love. Your beliefs are forced to change because of a discovery. A point of no return is when something changes in the story and it can never be the same as it once was. In Everything Everywhere All at Once by Daniels, Evelyn is being warned about the magnitude of the situation at hand. She's being told she'll have to make a decision about which path to choose, and that she'll know when she has to fight. She avoids all of these confrontations to the best of her ability until she recognizes that she cannot avoid the conflict anymore because her life depends on it. As the IRS agent seemingly pursues her, she is forced into a fight. This is the first time Evelyn has ever been violent, and it opens up a whole new world to her. She realizes she's capable of taking matters into her own hands internally, and externally she is now both wanted and recognized as a legitimate threat. There's no coming back from this, but she still is weak and inexperienced. An ally has to finish the fight for her. Quote, "A story must not retreat to actions of lesser quality or magnitude, but move progressively forward to a final action beyond which the audience cannot imagine another." End quote, Robert McKee. Humans are fundamentally conservative, so they'll start with the least amount of effort necessary and work up from there, having to put more and more effort in as they continue. In a closely following scene, Evelyn comes to another point of no return. She takes a first jump, acquiring the kung fu abilities of one of her alternate life paths in the multiverse. It's a feeling she previously could not have understood, but now that she's experienced it, a new world opens up to her again. She takes on the threat that she previously had to get help with. Note that she still has many questions about the process, situation, and her own abilities. She is not invincible and has much progress to make, but she is on a forward trajectory. You can see that people will always start with the least amount of effort, but it's important to remember that your story cannot stagnate at one level of conflict. Back to escalation, or progressive complications. The characters must take greater and greater actions continuously. This will keep the momentum of the film forward at all times. I mentioned that points of no return could be internal, external, or philosophical. Let's again look at Everything Everywhere All at Once to recognize points of no return in each of these three categories. Internal. The movie ramps up with our protagonist, Evelyn, in a hectic place. She's balancing taxes, family relationships, and a laundromat upkeep. Her husband is unhappy with their relationship, so he keeps trying to propose the idea of a divorce to her, but she's too busy to pay attention. Just as all of these elements build to a tipping point and she's realizing she's going to have to take not only all of these problems, but the fate of the universe into her own hands, she also finally realizes that her husband wants to leave her. This is an internal point of no return because she realizes the levels of loss she is about to feel. She can no longer feel safe in her relationship with her husband, and she realizes everything is shattering. External. An easy external point of no return to recognize is the sense of danger that is introduced into her previously safe environment. At this point in the story, Evelyn had not felt pursued by anything other than stress, but now physical danger is introduced into the world and she has to stay on the run. This is an external factor that is changed that creates conflict because the enemy wants her and she wants to stay away from them. Philosophical. Jumping further into the film, all of the internal and external conflicts start boiling down into a singular, focused philosophical conflict. One of Evelyn's selves has now died in the multiverse and she's felt the weight of that. She has seen branching life paths from both with and without her husband present, and she recognizes the difference that it would make on her. She experiences a life where she's a lesbian, which she had previously ridiculed her daughter for. Evelyn realizes that when someone can live all of her different lives all at once, that ultimately there are no consequences. When one Evelyn can replace the other, when she can have her husband or not at any moment, when she herself breaks down any moral boundary she once felt from one life to the next, she realizes that nothing matters. At the beginning of the film, Evelyn has a set criteria of things she cares about, and that is evident in how she acts because she's trying to appease all of them. This value changes, and now she cares about none of those things because her new worldview is that nothing matters. She's adopting a nihilistic approach to life. And of course, this philosophy will feed into her internal struggles and her external world. Internal, external, and philosophical conflicts do not exist independently of each other. Now, let's look at wants and costs. If you've been following the series, you'll already know that characters all have wants. But what we're going to look at in this episode is that all of these wants need to progressively cost them more and more. As the want stays the same, it gets more expensive as the story continues. These costs reassure them that they cannot return from where they came. Anything truly valuable will be expensive, and any human can understand and relate to that. Without immense cost, something cannot be truly valuable. And without severe suffering, your characters will not be forced to change, shift what they believe, or act. Evelyn's shift to believing that nothing matters cost her all of her relationships that she was once fighting to salvage. She is suddenly willing to sign the divorce papers. Finally, let's break down a scene and figure out how to build conflict into each scene. If you're off base with your philosophical conflict, sometimes you can try to interject some conflict into a scene artificially to give it meaning when the scene is inherently unneeded. This can happen if your scene spawns from a cool idea you had instead of following the organic direction your characters would take based on their philosophical stances. If you write your characters correctly around your philosophical conflict, this conflict will organically sprout in each scene, feeding one scene into the next. It should be a natural progression the characters must take. Conflicts and arguments that are necessary for your character to move forward. McKee had this to say about conflict. Your movie must move in a direction beyond which the audience cannot imagine another. End quote. You do this by following the core beliefs of the characters. Just as I said previously, Evelyn is acting on her beliefs. At first, she believes in a set of things that matter and she desperately fights for them. As her beliefs are changed and she no longer cares for them, her actions follow and she rids herself of those things. Now you may be thinking that every scene has to feel overbearingly ridden with your message, which isn't exactly what I'm saying. There can be moments where seemingly unrelated things are happening, but they must lead toward a very intentional endpoint that makes a statement about your philosophical conflict. Robert McKee says that scene objective is a character's specific goal for this particular scene, while a super objective is the character's overall goal and reason for what they're doing. The super objective is usually the underlying reason for what a character wants in the scene objective. The biggest thing to know about scene is that you must understand the purpose of your scene. If it has no definite purpose toward the philosophical conflict of your story, then it is unneeded. John Truby explains that you set a scene in an organic situation the characters would find themselves in, and then you slowly funnel it down until the final punchline of the scene comes. The end note of the scene should be the reason it exists. Examining the scene early on, when Evelyn first jumps and learns Kung Fu, we can find all of these elements. Evelyn's scene objective is to escape the IRS agent and survive. This is what she is feeling in the moment because she cares about saving herself and her family. The super objective here is that she is learning she can do anything. We boil this scene down until she makes her jump and realizes she is capable of exploring the multiverse and holding her own. The character feels a very in-the-moment goal, but it's feeding into the larger idea of her exploring the multiverse and seeing all of her life paths. So to break it down into a few easy steps. Understand the beliefs of your characters and where they stand in your philosophical conflict. Challenge those beliefs through other characters who hold opposing beliefs. Start at 0 and slowly ramp up to 100, never dropping back down to where you have been before. Let the conflict rise and force your characters to change. Last, understand the purpose of each scene. Funnel the scene down to a specific point that drives the larger story forward in some way. Remember guys, you can get my free screenplay guide in the description below. Submit your email to receive that as we continue into this recap. How to create conflict. Conflict is a series of tests which challenge the beliefs of the characters. Conflict must have a steady escalation. A story must not retreat to actions of lesser quality or magnitude, but move progressively forward to a final action beyond which the audience cannot imagine another. Robert McKee. Your characters cannot face the same levels of antagonism at the beginning of your story that they will come to face at the end. You need to lay out points of no return, which are changes in the character that they cannot go back from. Humans are fundamentally conservative and will put in as little effort as possible at first, but will slowly put in more and more as they need to achieve their goals. Wants and costs. Nothing is valuable unless it costs something. What they want must cost more and more as the story proceeds. Thus, they must put in more and more effort for it. If you write your characters around your philosophical conflict correctly, then the conflict will organically sprout out of each scene and lead to the next. It is easy to artificially inject conflict in a scene when it is not rooted in your philosophical conflict, but this will make a weak and ultimately meaningless scene. Conflict is artificial if the point of tension in a scene arises out of something other than the character's beliefs, and if its resolution will make no statement within the philosophical conflict. Understand the beliefs of your characters and where they stand in the philosophical conflict. Challenge those beliefs through the events and other characters. Start at 0 and ramp to 100, never dropping back down to where you have been before. Understand the purpose of each scene. Funnel a scene down to a specific point about the philosophical conflict which creates change and drives the larger story forward. Thanks for watching this episode. It's one of the most important elements of storytelling, so I hoped it helped you out a little bit. Make sure to catch the next episode because we'll be talking about the elements of a screenplay. I'll see you there.